Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast, coming at you on a Wednesday morning, October 16th edition of the RTI Press Pass. We are over halfway through the college football season, and Tennessee has played 6 games so far. It's been a lot this season to, take away from, especially the last 2 games for Tennessee, the loss to Arkansas, and then barely beating Florida. We'll get into Florida a little bit before diving in to the third Saturday in October. Alabama comes to town this weekend. It's a big one. Top 11 ranked matchup here between Tennessee and the Tide. I got Ryan Shepard and Rick Butler with me as always. Ryan, how you doing this morning?
Doing well. It's something you kind of circled immediately when the schedules came out, whenever that was, a long time ago now. But just the chaos of having Florida and Alabama in 8 days leads to this probably being one of the busiest, or if not busiest, at least just the most exciting football weeks of the year.
Yeah, Rick, I mean, this is what it's all about, right? This week in college football, Tennessee, Alabama doesn't get much bigger than this.
No, it doesn't. And Ryan, you can even add on SEC media days for a lot of Tennessee fans out there who are just trying to take in as much sports coverage as they can. It's not only a huge rivalry week, it's also a big basketball week, as the guys were in Birmingham yesterday. When I think about this game, and I kind of want to start this off and throw it to you guys. We talked last week a little bit how the regular season games, sometimes you can afford more of a loss and it gives you a little bit more wiggle room. With the way that the first round of the playoffs are in teams' home stadiums, I mean, I'm thinking about this game on Saturday like it's almost an October playoff game in a way. Because you look at Tennessee and Alabama, both teams have one loss. That one loss was fairly unexpected heading into this game. Neither team, whichever team loses this game coming up, they can't afford another loss. But if you do lose this game, you're in a pretty rough position with Tennessee having Georgia left on the table. I believe Alabama has Missouri and Oklahoma and LSU left on the table. So I almost think of this game almost like a quasi playoff game here in October. It's a big game for both teams. Both teams are going to really need to win it. That's why it's great that it's a rivalry game. But at the same time, man, it's like, hey, this is one of the biggest games in college football for two teams with playoff aspirations. So much to talk about, so much to look forward to. Do you guys kind of agree with that, though? I mean, obviously not perfect, comparison, but a little bit of an October playoff game.
Yeah, I think it is a playoff game for Tennessee. If Tennessee loses this game, I feel like the Vols are all but out. I mean, obviously they'd have to beat Georgia, and sure, that's possible. But with Georgia's back likely being against the wall in Athens, it's just hard for me to see Tennessee winning that game. So I think pressure's more on Tennessee here because Alabama has a more gettable schedule rest away. I think Alabama could win out. Hard teams for sure, but I like Alabama's chances of winning out more, Ryan, than Tennessee.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Especially, it's just hard to see Tennessee winning that Georgia game, even with them looking a little bit more vulnerable than maybe we thought before the season. But yeah, I mean, it's a big game for both teams. I mean, Alabama, that LSU, Missouri game's at home, I believe, but the LSU game on the road is going to be a really hard one. And, I don't think Oklahoma's going to be a big issue for them. But yeah, it feels must win for Tennessee and maybe not quite as must win for Alabama. But if, whatever it be, Alabama falls to 5-2 in the first year, post Nick Saban, with the schedule, it's some still challenging games the rest of the way. It's certainly I say all to say it's a pressure spot for the Tide as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how the last 2 weeks for these two teams have gone very similarly. An upset loss. Alabama's was worse to Vanderbilt, I think. But, Alabama getting upset by Vandy in Nashville on the road. Tennessee getting upset by Arkansas on the road. Both teams looking very ugly in home wins against South Carolina for Bama and Florida for Tennessee. And it's, it's so weird in this game how it's a matchup of good v good and bad v bad. Alabama's offense has struggled at times, but for the most part, it's been really dynamic, really explosive for sure. Alabama's offense against a great unit in Tennessee's defense. Tennessee's offense, which is significantly underwhelmed, looked terrible the last 2 weeks against an Alabama defense that got 40 hung on them 2 weeks ago by Vanderbilt. So you're not talking about a good unit here when you're talking about the Alabama defense. So, Rick, when you look at those two matchups, the good v good and the bad v bad, which one intrigues you more? The Tennessee's offense versus Bama defense or the other way around?
That's a really good question. I think for me, it is how does the Tennessee defense stand up to the Alabama offense? And there's a couple of different things I look at with that. And that's not to say that the other side isn't, almost just as intriguing. You can make arguments both sides. But one thing that I did look about, and to kind of go along to your point right there, I went back and I looked at some of the grades for the Alabama-South Carolina game. And Matt Stahl of Alabama.com, AL.com, really, he posted a couple of really good thoughts from the game breakdown. And his quote was, hey, Alabama struggled to sustain drives, and they didn't have that same home run punch that they had in previous games and previous instances this season so far. So that to me was fascinating that hey, this is kind of what this Alabama offense is. They do struggle to sustain drives as a whole throughout 4 quarters, throughout this whole really season so far. But you have Jalen Milroe, you have Ryan Williams, you have some extremely talented pieces that can give you that home run punch. Sounds a little bit like what Tennessee has been at times in their past as well. So that's something I'm really interested in. I think that Tennessee's defense can sort of play into that. They can, they can limit the drives that Alabama has throughout the games. But how is Tennessee going to play against those explosive plays? I think we're going to be talking about explosive plays a lot for both teams. To me, this is the game of explosivity. Which team has the more chunk plays? Which team has the more doubles into the right center gap? Which team can make those big chunk plays down the field? Because I do think that both teams are going to have a little bit of a difficult time sustaining drives just because of the previous instances. So that to me is one of the first things I think about. I think Matt Stahl gave Alabama's offense a C- in that game against South Carolina. And again, that's from not hitting those big home run type drives. So that's definitely something that I'm looking forward to here. But if Ryan goes the other way, if you go the other way in terms of the answer, I don't blame you at all. I think it's 2 really intriguing matchups for the reasons you listed.
I think, maybe just in the macro, I would agree. I think that's the most intriguing, just from the following covering Tennessee standpoint. Of Tennessee's defense has been really good this season. This is by far the hardest test that it's faced to date. So I'm really curious to see how they'll perform if they can continue to play at an elite level. And I think in the South Carolina game and Rick, some of the stuff you just said, Alabama's offense almost reminds me a little bit of Tennessee's offense in 21, and that it is really good, but very big play dependent. Like it's like in 2022, and I think I said this a lot before last year. Defense coordinators talked all the time about you just got to take the big plays away from Tennessee. Well, that didn't really matter in 2022 because Tennessee could go 10 plays down the field, hitting 5 to 15 yards every play and score. I think if you do that to Alabama, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to sustain success. In the passing game, it's almost exclusively chunk plays. The run game with their tailbacks has been average, I guess.
Jam Miller's solid, but it's not great. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly Jalen Milroe is a good runner and extending plays and both being able to create some chunk plays. So that aspect is really interesting to me. And they also, and I don't have the exact number in front of me, they also have a little bit of what Arkansas had in that they scored a pretty high clip in the red zone, but it's almost all rushing touchdowns. And to me, I think that's when we talk specifically about this game, the thing I'm most interested in is Tennessee the last 2 weeks has been so good at opponents driving the plus 35 and then not end up scoring or just getting 3 points. Part of me thinks that can't continue, but part of me thinks that looks at some of those numbers and thinks maybe it is possible because what Alabama does well in the red zone, Tennessee's good at taking away.
Yeah, Ryan, and it's funny you say that. This is something I was going to actually bring up later, but you talked about it in your preview, so this was kind of my first inkling of it. But you wrote down here in your Alabama preview, you can find that over on RockyTopInsider.com. Crimson Tide have scored 19 touchdowns in 24 trips to the red zone. 17 of those 19 touchdowns, though, have been on the ground. Alabama struggled to pass the ball when the field shrinks, and that's where they lean on its ground game. To your point, though, and something that Amari Thomas actually talked about yesterday with the media, Tennessee has been good in the red zone there. To me, it gives me a little bit of optimism that, it might not always be perfect, but Tennessee's got such a stout unit, such a stout front seven in the red zone. They have been able to be successful at just standing up a little bit of that bend but don't break mindset. Here is what Amari Thomas had to say yesterday about Tennessee's efficiency in the red zone on defense.
It just falls back on our training. We go through fall camp, spring practice, regular practice. Like, we have red zone moments where we get a chance to be in the red zone where offense is trying to score, and we just take pride in those moments. We take pride in not letting people score and get in the end zone. So as a defense, we know that's important. And usually you get in situations like that from sudden changes, different things like that. So you just have to be ready to capitalize and not get scared about it, and just be ready to go out there and do what you do, honestly.
So there it is. I mean, 17 out of 19 touchdowns, been on the ground. Tennessee's been stout right there, especially with their front seven. That's an area that I'm looking at as maybe a key to this game, as maybe a differentiating factor in this game. How can Tennessee's defense stand up like they have a couple times so far this season when Alabama gets down to the red zone?
I would be willing to say that the red zone defense is why Tennessee beat Florida. Like, the plays Tennessee was able to make when Florida was deep in drives, Tennessee's defense saved that game on multiple occasions. And yeah, when you look at Alabama and, like you said, strength in the red zones, rushing the football, only 2 of Jalen Milroe's 11 touchdown passes have happened inside the 20. So we're talking about 9 touchdowns outside of the 20-yard line. This is good v. good, even to the micro with Tennessee's red zone defense, Ryan. And it feels like you have to give them the advantage at this point over any offense.
For sure. I agree with that. But I just think we're going to see more. I just don't think it's going to continue, at least in this game, the way it has the last 2 weeks. And don't get me wrong, Tennessee has forced some of these mistakes, but Arkansas and Florida were both so incompetent. And it's not just the red zone, but yes, they were. Florida had the worst. Florida had the worst clock management situation I've ever seen.
Okay, yes.
They fumbled at the 1 yard line.
Play calling
execution in the red zone wasn't horrible to me. Play calling,
I would say fumbling on a quarterback sneak on first and goal.
That's James Pierce. See, to me, that's James Pierce.
It's both. I mean, it's both. It's both. But under no circumstances,
that is a Tennessee play, not a Florida bad play, in my opinion.
It's both. It's absolutely both. The number one thing you should be doing. You should not be bouncing the QB sneak outside and messing up or risking ball security. Now, James Pierce made a great play. To me, that one's both. And a lot of them are both. That's where I say Tennessee's forcing some of these mistakes. But Florida snaps a third down play at the end of the half with, I believe, 58 seconds on the clock, and they don't get a field goal attempt, or a second down play, excuse me. And they don't get a field goal attempt off. And don't get me wrong, 2 great plays. Great play by Boo Carter on the second down, blowing up the tunnel screen. And then a good play by him and Omar Norman-Lott on the sack. So there's an element of Tennessee forcing these mistakes, but there's also a level of absolute incompetence from Florida in those situations too to not score. And I say all that to say that I think for this game, going back to the full conversation, I'm most intrigued by how this game is decided by Tennessee's offense versus Alabama's defense. Because I think Alabama will get somewhere. They'll score 27 to 34 points, somewhere in that range in this game, in my opinion. I think Tennessee will have to score to win. Now, there's obviously ranges of that. Asking Tennessee to score 28 points, I think, is, even for an offense that's struggling, isn't just a crazy ask. I think they do make 2 plays and 5 opportunities last week. They probably scored 27 points in regulation. But that's the one I'm most interested in. And Alabama has been vulnerable in the run game, but so is Florida. Tennessee didn't take advantage of it. And then Alabama's defense just really the last 2 weeks has struggled a lot. They have a lot of youth in the secondary. Tennessee had some guys running open down the field last week, and they weren't able to hit them. I think Tennessee needs to be able – I think opportunities will be there again for Tennessee in this game. But to me, I think they're going to have to hit on those plays to win. There are some paths where Tennessee could win this game 21-20 or something like that. I think that's possible, but I do think it's very unlikely. I think if Tennessee's going to win this game, they're going to have to make some of these plays offensively and score 27, 28, 30 points.
I guess. I will say Tennessee obviously hasn't allowed 20 points in a game this season. Alabama's offense looked very human. Milroe played horrible in the first half against South Carolina, went up 14-0 and didn't score for an hour of actual time, it felt like, not including halftime. So I don't think this Alabama offense is just some supreme juggernaut that is going to truck whoever they play. I think Tennessee can hold them to 21, Rick. That's just kind of what I think right now.
I see Alabama landing in that 24 to maybe 27-ish range. So not too much behind Ryan, but maybe a little bit lower. Jack, you just mentioned, though, the X factor for Alabama to me, and it's obviously Jalen Milroe with all the different things that he can do. Now, he's been really impressive at times this season. I believe he might be around the top 5, top 6 of the Heisman odds. I don't really know where he's landed on that yet. I haven't looked at them in a little while after Nico Iamaleava kind of fell off, right? So I don't know where he is on that, but he's had some impressive plays. He's also had some rough plays, though. Certainly plays he'd want back. I look at just how is Tennessee going to defend Jalen Milroe? I think you've got to be able to contain him in the pocket. I think he is a guy who can beat you with his legs. Now, Alabama, I believe, averaging just over 260 rush yards per game. Certainly, Jalen Milroe's legs, impact that. One thing that I was actually watching on Monday, I was watching the New York Jets. Who are they playing? The Buffalo Bills. And I was watching the Manning cast. Jack, were you watching the Manning cast as well?
Absolutely.
Bill Belichick, who I'm not a gigantic fan of him being on like the whole first half, but he does come with some really good lines every once in a while. He had a really good line in that game, and something that I was sort of starting to notice, but really kind of locked it in once he said it. He said that New York Jets their free safeties were making way too many tackles in the run game in that game, and I thought that made a lot of sense. It immediately sort of clicked for me for this Alabama game as well. Tennessee needs their front seven and their linebackers especially to play stout, fundamental football. And one thing we didn't talk about when talking about Tennessee's defense so far is that they're not going to have Keenan Peely this game. Now, in fairness, he only played 2 snaps against Florida, so it's not like they lost him at the very end and now they're sort of gearing up for a game without him. I think they certainly understood what that was like last year, and they understood what that was like in the Florida game. But that's a big loss for Tennessee. How is Arion Carter going to step up? How is Jeremiah Telander going to step up? I think he has certainly received a lot of compliments from the Tennessee coaching staff and his fellow teammates because of his play in the last couple of weeks. But how are they going to slow down Jalen Milroe? How are they going to slow down Ryan Williams? I think these are all things that just makes Jalen Milroe such an important factor in this game. But he also has been a little bit turnover prone at some point. I believe he threw 2 interceptions against South Carolina last weekend. We talked about Tennessee forcing the fumble against Graham Mertz. I don't know how it happens. Maybe it might be through the air. Maybe it might be through the ground. Tennessee's got to win that turnover battle as well. But I really look at Jalen Milroe as somebody that, man, he can win this game for Alabama if Tennessee's not careful with him.
Before we get to our definitive keys to the game and, really hone in on those, Ryan, just speak for a minute about this Keenan Peely injury. The word is Jeremiah Telander is obviously going to get increased playing time. I think everyone expected that. Arion Carter is having a breakout season, but beyond that, the room does look pretty thin. Sure, Caleb Perry, Jalen Smith, guys who can contribute, but this is a big loss for Tennessee.
Certainly, a guy that was playing at a really high level for Tennessee, I think was a big part of why the run defense had been so good or has been so good this season. And it's, I don't think just debilitating necessarily. I mean, we saw it on Saturday night. There wasn't just some behemoth drop-off, certainly a drop-off. But all of a sudden the room becomes a lot more thin. And I think it's just, and it starts with Telander, who I'd say I have the most trust in. But even like a guy like Arion Carter, because Telander would play, a little bit of both those spots before, everybody's just going to play more snaps. And it goes from Telander being a guy playing 30 snaps a game to probably 50, 60 snaps a game. And then the 2 guys you named, Jalen Smith and Caleb Perry, going from, all right, you're playing 20 snaps a game and it's in these specific packages or in this specific role to, all right, you're out there for a drive now. And you have to play, instead of 18 snaps, you got to play 28, 35 snaps. And spots you're maybe not quite as accustomed to playing, comfortable with playing, or just suited to playing. So, and in this game is certainly a big question because of how important the linebackers are going to be with Jalen Milroe and the way that he can beat the team with his legs. So I think it's a big loss. And in one just Jalen Milroe stat quickly that was, I don't know if surprising is the right word, but funny to look at. He is second in the SEC, only behind Dylan Sampson with 11 rushing touchdowns.
Wow.
That is. Hey, can I add one more, Jack? Can I add one more thing to what Ryan was saying right there? A couple of stats that just kind of, it doesn't really make the point. There's not really a point to be made here, but just a little bit of interesting preview as to what Tennessee might do. So prior to the Florida game and the, 5 games leading into that, Arion Carter and Keenan Peely combined for 62% of Tennessee's snaps. When he got hurt against Florida, Jeremiah Telander and Arion Carter combined for 69% of Tennessee's linebacker snaps in that game. But as to Ryan's point, Caleb Perry and Jalen Smith both saw a major increased workload as well. Caleb Perry was averaging just 8.5 snaps against Oklahoma and Arkansas. I believe he missed the North Carolina State game as well. He bumped that all the way up to 35 snaps against the Gators, so more than tripled his average in those other two SEC games. And then Tennessee linebacker Jalen Smith also saw a higher snap count against Florida, just not as big of an increase as Lander and Perry. So certainly I think that Tennessee is going to be rotating their guys in. We've seen more Jalen Smith in the last couple of weeks. I certainly don't expect that to be different here in this case against Alabama coming up on Saturday. But Jeremiah Lander and Arian Carter, I think the keys are in their hand, and a lot of the trust is going to be in their hands as well.
Yeah, the rush defense to me is what I fear takes a big hit because it's been so great for Tennessee, and Pilley's been such a big part of that. Is there a drop off there is what I'm most worried about.
And to that point as well, something that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember if it was on a weekly press pass episode or if we were doing one of the instant reaction episodes, but Gannon Pilley was an enforcer for this team. He was the guy who would drive people into the ground, maybe a hair or two late after the play, but he was one of those guys who could lay that hit and sort of establish that, hey, the Tennessee defense is here to play. Not that I think an enforcer is going to tank Tennessee's season, or it certainly didn't tank the Florida game like Ryan was alluding to just a minute ago. But it's not easy when you lose your enforcer of the team. I'm sure Tennessee has others, but he's just kind of the one that stood out to me the most through these first 5-6 games of the season so far. So a big loss for Tennessee in certainly certain different ways, but we'll see how Tennessee responds.
Yeah, a leader too. I mean, you can be vocal on the sidelines, but this is a guy who's very vocal and a great leader on the field for that Tennessee defense. Ryan, let's get into the keys of the game. Your biggest key for Tennessee against Alabama is what?
I think it's to hit some stuff in the passing game, and particularly down the field. I just think they have to do something to loosen things up for the rest of the offense, for the run game, for some of the short passing game. And I think that's hitting stuff down the field. And it can be in the intermediate some too, which they did do better in the Florida game. They hit a couple plays in the intermediate. Again, I said it, I don't know, a couple minutes ago, that I think Tennessee's offense is the biggest key for them to win this game. The offense has to play well. And for me, with how bad the offensive line is, I think they're going to have to hit some big plays. They can't be relied upon to put together 4 long drives or anything like that, ends and touchdowns. And certainly they could get help with good field position. I mean, that's how they scored 10 or 17 points in regulation the other night, was having great field position to start 2 drives. But I think that's the thing I would pinpoint is chunk plays in the passing game. They have to hit a handful of those.
Did it seem like to you in the Florida game that Tennessee, or Nico maybe, just kept throwing it deep over and over again a little bit? Like, it wasn't every play, but it felt like there were so many deep shots that resulted in nothing, and they kept trying. And I don't know if they were trying to find a rhythm there, but it just felt like there were so many deep shots that were being attempted late in the game against Florida, maybe trying to ignite something before Tennessee just said, okay, we're going to give Dylan Sampson the ball every play.
No, not really.
You didn't get that vibe?
No, I mean, I think they took 5 deep shots. 2 of them, you're right, were late, but one of those I loved. It was 3rd and long, packed up in their, not quite the own end zone, but deep in their own territory. And it's like, all right, let's just heave one deep to man-on-man coverage to Chris Brazell. They were more aggressive, I would agree, but I didn't feel like they just took a ton. I would say, to your point, there might have been an element of, let's try to hit when they were up by 7 in the 4th quarter. We can just hit one. We can just hit one big play and get a field goal.
Close it down.
Over.
Yeah.
I think there might have been some of that element to it, but just as a whole, I don't know. Florida, to me, felt like they were daring Tennessee to throw the ball down the field and have the receivers make a play one-on-one. And I think Tennessee was trying their damnedest to do that. And certainly there were a couple times they were pretty close, but obviously nothing ever was completed and nothing completely clicked.
Rick, biggest key of the game for you?
Yeah, to Ryan's point right there as well. We've talked about how the receivers have maybe struggled at times, but hey, Josh Heupel and Tennessee's offense, they got a couple guys deep down the field a couple of different times in that Florida game. It was just an incompletion. Nico Iamaleava, he overthrew his guy. I think Ryan's 100% correct, so I'm going to go in a different direction. But that is, you got to hit your explosive plays. You got to make chunk plays down the passing field. I do think that Alabama is going to hit their own explosive plays, so Tennessee's got to be able to respond with their own. That all being said, I'll go in a different direction. To me, when you have it, and this isn't necessarily maybe here's something Tennessee has to pull out of their hat or something like that. But when you have an advantage in the game, you need to exploit that, right? You can't let an advantage in the game turn into just some sort of moot point or even a disadvantage. Tennessee's got the advantage when they're on offense, they can run the ball. Alabama cannot stop the run. Tennessee right now has the SEC's #1 rushing attack for a reason. Use it. You've got to use it. I know we're talking about the passing plays and the explosivity a lot, but you've also got to get that ground game working, mainly because Alabama has the SEC's 3rd worst rush defense at 129 yards per game. Again, that's an advantage that Tennessee has to continue to use. If Tennessee spoils that advantage, I think that maybe puts you behind the 8 ball, because we've seen how important Dylan Sampson and that running game is to this offense. So I agree with Ryan first and foremost that the most important thing in this game for Tennessee's offense is the explosive passing plays, is getting the ball moving downfield. But I also think that when you look at that next step from that, what is going to be Tennessee's bread and butter? I still believe it's going to be the run game in this game. You have to be able to take advantage where you have the advantage. And I really believe that Tennessee has a pretty decent sized separation right here. This isn't the Nick Saban team where it was, we're going to stop the run game at all costs. This is Kalen DeBoer's team where they let the run happen a pretty good bit more frequently for the Alabama defense. Yeah. So take advantage where you have it.
Yeah, I'll go on the defensive side of things since you guys focused on the offense a little bit. While I do think it's important for Tennessee's offense to obviously have a pulse, if they don't, they're going to lose. But it's just preventing Jalen Milroe from running all over you, especially in 3rd down situations, and forcing mistakes. I like Tennessee's defensive line against this Bama offensive line. I think they will be able to get Milroe under duress a lot of times. It's just, will you get beat by his legs in scramble drills? So that to me is a big key. The red zone defense, which we hit on earlier in the pod, is a big thing because Alabama's going to move the ball. So if Tennessee's offense, I don't expect to come out just rolling. So Tennessee's going to have to stop Bama in the red zone, get field goals to stay in the game. I don't think Tennessee will come out and just punch them in the mouth. That's just not what I think this game will be. If Tennessee's going to win, I feel like it'll just be a 60-minute slugfest that Tennessee wins by 4 or 5 points at the end. You know, I just don't see a Tennessee blowout on the table. Could be wrong, but to me, it's
a slugfest or a slogfest, really.
Yeah, either one, right? To me, it's just preventing Jalen Milroe from having Houdini moments with his legs is my thing.
Hey, Jalen Milroe only had 9 carries for 3 yards in that game last year against Tennessee. I know that game played out a little bit differently. They had a deficit to overcome there early in the game, and it's certainly sacks and kneel downs, I'd imagine, plays into that as well. But I wonder if Alabama looks at that and they say, you know what, I think we have more of an opportunity, or maybe we want to get those legs moving a little bit more. So
second half of that game last year is when Alabama started to realize the best way to use Jalen Milroe was to run him a ton. They came out in the second half and started running him, and never looked back the rest of last season, and their offense was a whole lot better for it.
Yeah, and hit some big plays too, right at the beginning of that second half last year. And this is a Tim Banks defense that has been good at that, has been pretty good at that all year too. So just preventing that kind of stuff which is a Jalen Milroe trademark strength of his, is the big arm and the deep ball. So it's a very intriguing matchup, man. Let's get into some fill in the blank. Rick, I'll start with you. I'll do both really quickly. You can answer them together. Tennessee blows out Alabama and Alabama blows out Tennessee if.
Well, I don't think either is going to happen. So I'd like to just kind of start there. I think that both teams are struggling enough in their certain respective categories to where it's not going to be a blowout in either kind of direction. I would be very surprised if it was. But if you're talking about a blowout, I hate to sound like a broken record, I just think it's that big of a key to this game. I think that one team is making explosive plays and the other isn't. And not only is the other not making explosive plays, but they're actively hurting themselves. We've talked about how Tennessee has shot themselves in the foot. Nico actually used that, he actually used that exact line, I believe, after the game on against Florida. We got to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. We got to stop taking penalties, things like that. I think that if one team just gets, 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns above the other, they're making explosive plays, and the other team is really hurting themselves. Self-inflicted wounds, self-inflicted penalties, and no explosive plays as well. So I would be shocked if it was a blowout in either direction, but I think that it would look a lot like explosive plays, taking the momentum and taking the pacing of the game for either team to get that direction.
Ryan?
I'll say Alabama wins a blowout if Tennessee's offense just has no pulse. I can see this being a game where the dam kind of breaks for the defense, and late in the third quarter, they've been holding up, and they're down 14-3. The offense can't do anything, and then you give up 2 touchdowns late. The dam just breaks. You lose 28-3. I think that's the path to an Alabama blowout. Much less of a one to a Tennessee blowout. I'll say Alabama turns it over 4 times. They hand Tennessee some points. Jalen Milroe is good at Tennessee. I mean, that was a big play last year's game in the first half. Tennessee gets a strip sack and gets the ball at the 15-yard line on a drive, or Jalen Milroe throws a pick 6, or there's just some debilitating turnovers for Alabama that either one take points off the board for them, or more likely to lead to a Tennessee blowout, or Alabama turnovers that lead directly to Tennessee points.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just a couple of weeks ago, Alabama has all the capabilities in the world to blow out one of the best teams in the nation. They blitz Georgia out the gate. So they can do that. They show that they can do that offensively and defensively, have a good start to the game. But, Rick, for me, Alabama blows out Tennessee if Tennessee plays offensively like they have in the last 2 first halves. That's literally just a repeat for Tennessee's offense. And Alabama does what they did against Georgia offensively. It's curtains, I think, early for Tennessee if that happens. And then I'll say Tennessee, along with Ryan, blows out Alabama if Jalen Milroe falls flat on his face. Fun fact, he has not played Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, or LSU on the road. So this is, I mean, he's played in Jordan-Hare, which Iron Bowl, that's tough. It's tough an environment as they probably come, top 5. So, but Neyland at night may hit a little differently, and it could rattle him a bit.
Yeah, and to your point a second ago, you talk about Alabama's big win over Georgia, and you talk about Alabama's win over Tennessee. Hey, home field, an environment, it matters in college football, and it can be an X factor, a differentiating factor in the game. I think that Tennessee is going to have an extremely hostile environment. I think they understand the last time that they were in that building for that specific rivalry game, what exactly transpired. Alabama fed off the crowd in that Georgia game, and obviously Georgia was able to come back and kind of silence that crowd down a little bit. But I see Tennessee's crowd making an impact in this game and being as rowdy as you would expect for a 3:30 kickoff against Alabama, 3rd Saturday in October. It really doesn't get any bigger than that.
All right, we breezed through some fill in the blanks, some keys to the game. Brian, I want to do a little bit of forecasting for next week.
Okay.
Tennessee loses to Alabama, and the same issues persist. The offense, maybe it's not a blowout loss. Dam doesn't break defensively, but Tennessee loses by 10-14 because the offense was stuck in mud all game. What are we talking about next week, and where would Tennessee go from there if that's what happens?
That's a good question. I think the offensive line will be the focus. And there will be plenty of talk just in general about the offensive line struggles. But to give a broad one, something I've been thinking about this week, is Lance Hurd good enough to play left tackle in the SEC? Does he have to move inside starting? I don't think it's going to happen this year, but starting next year. Because in some sense, this game, Tennessee needs to win for college football playoff hopes. It's a bye week next week, so there will be more talk about Tennessee as a whole, and I'm sure talking a little bit more about the long-term issues of the things that have put Tennessee in a bad spot this season. And to me, that this week, as I've watched the Florida game back and continue to assess Tennessee's options or their issues too, that's the thought that I keep wondering is, all right, how much of this is fixable? Lance Hurd is the only starting offensive lineman that's going to be back next year. Is he good enough to get better and be a good starting left tackle in the SEC? Or does he end up somewhere else? Or does Tennessee need to move him inside the guard for him to be a high-level SEC player?
Yeah, Rick, what do you see being the reasoning behind another ugly Tennessee offensive performance, and just what will we be talking about here next Wednesday? Tennessee loses to Alabama by like 10-14.
Oh, I'm glad that you kind of asked it like that. I think, to Ryan's point, I think we will be talking about the offensive line. I certainly think that we'll hit the other problems that come up. But if Tennessee loses in the way that we're talking about here, in the way that we're sort of forecasting for this hypothetical question, yes, I think that we're talking about the offensive line. I do think that the people are going to be talking about the quarterback and the play calling to an extent. because that's the common place that everybody goes to. I mean, you look at and I did see some pushback on social media this week, which I always find interesting. I think somebody had a long thread about, hey, look, people want to criticize the quarterback and people want to criticize this one might have been actually more towards the play calling, but then showing how Tennessee did get some wide receivers open down the field. But people are always talking about the quarterback and people are always talking about the play caller, who in this case is the head coach, kind of / OC. You can throw Joey Halsley in there. YouTube comments especially. YouTube comments are ferocious. I know Jack knows what I'm talking about here. They're way worse than Twitter comments. They're way worse than Facebook comments. They're way worse than Instagram comments. YouTube comments are savage. I hope we don't get too many bad ones here on this show. But so I was watching them all week. I know exactly what people were talking about coming out of the Florida game. Even though that was a win, I can really just see that, hey, people like talking about the quarterback. And I think that people understand that might be an easier thing to kind of talk about, to where there's not too many people who truly know the ins and outs of the offensive line. Yes, you can look at bad offensive line play and see that it's bad offensive line play. There's no doubt about that. But I think people love to talk about the quarterback in this situation. I think people love to talk about the head coach and the play caller. So to me, we're going to be talking about the offensive line. We're going to be trying to break that down here on the press pass. But I think social media is going to be talking a lot about the quarterback.
Yeah, that's
right or for wrong.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
There's something to be said about Nico not being able to carry. He's very young and it's his first year. I don't think we should have expected him to, but true just alien difference-making quarterbacks can carry you. And I don't know if Nico's there yet. I don't think he's there really at all yet. He's shown it. He has to have some things at least go right around him. The running game's always going to be there, but the receivers can't sell. The O-line can't just not protect. So with the O-line being so underwhelming, I do think that's the reasoning behind this. And the tackle spot for sure, Ryan. I know we talk about it all the time, but John Campbell continuing to have a down year. Lance Hurd, hit or miss, maybe, played better in the second half last week, but was awful in the first half. And then Cooper Mays had a great year, but Spraggins not been as good as he's been in the past. It just feels like the O-line is the culprit of all the offensive issues for me right now, and I don't know if it's going to get better.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. And that's why, I liked a lot of what Tennessee did with rollouts in this game. And Nico just seems way more comfortable right now making plays on the move, as opposed to having to stand in the pocket strong, where the pocket's collapsing. And I think it's pretty obvious at this point he's in his head a little bit. Even in a few instances where the pocket is clean, he's expecting it not to be clean, which, it's hard to blame a young quarterback for that with how few and far between those clean pockets are. So I completely agree. One thing I will say I thought was interesting on the run game on Saturday against Florida. I thought by far the most negative runs they've had this year. Like Oklahoma, Arkansas game, a lot of times the run game wasn't clicking, but it was still, all right, you're in 2nd and 8. It felt like this game there was a lot of 2nd and 13, 2nd and 12 from the run game. Now you had a good bit of that, at least in the Arkansas game, from false starts and then 4-yard runs on first down, so you're in 2nd and 11. But to me, it felt like more stuff got blown up in the run game against Florida than at any point this season.
I cannot be 100% positive, and I've been unable to find like quarter box scores, but I remember in the first half when Tennessee was just terrible offensively, I looked at a box score and Dylan Sampson had maybe like 11 for 27 on the ground, which I was just baffled by the inefficiency that Tennessee had. Ended up 27, buck 12 and 3 scores. So he had a great game, had a ton of work. But yeah, Tennessee's rushing efficiency wasn't as good as you'd like to see against the Florida team that struggled mightily against the run all year long. So maybe it's not just slam dunk Tennessee's always going to run on opponents. And that's what we said gave Tennessee such a high floor offensively, coming off that Oklahoma game when everything was super peachy and Tennessee was going to go to the national championship, right? It was this team, they're unfazed because the rushing offense gives them such a high floor and the D-line gives the defense such a high floor, which still remains to be true. But obviously the offense can fall flat at any moment. And, you can't get one dimensional. It's a question I wanted to ask about this game, Rick. And I think the answer is definitely no. But do you think there's any way that Tennessee can beat Alabama if the passing offense is what it's been and the only thing that's working is number 6 still? Like, can Tennessee find a way to still win the game if that's the case offensively?
Yeah, I lean towards no alongside with you, Jack. And this is also, excluding a situation that you both just mentioned a minute ago. Tennessee blows out if Jalen Milroe has a 4 turnover type of performance. That's excluding that, right? This is just saying if Alabama's playing average Alabama ball, just kind of what they've been doing, can Tennessee win that game without the passing game coming through? I think no, because as good as the running game can be, I think that Tennessee needs those plays downfield because, again, I do expect Alabama to have some success in that realm. It might not be, 5 different explosive plays down the field, but I think that you can hit 2, 3, maybe even 4. I think that can be enough. So I think that Tennessee has to be able to respond in those type of moments. They've got to be able to respond to moments where Alabama might put points on the scoreboard or take a lead or something like that. And the running game, again, we've talked about this, it can be advantageous for Tennessee. It's a huge mismatch in terms of where Tennessee is offensively rushing and where Alabama is defensively against the rush. It's a huge mismatch. At least that's what the stats say on paper. But no, I think this has to be some sort of version of complementary football. And I think that that's what Josh Heupel wants to do. He's always said that the run sets up the pass. Well, they need the run to set up the pass in this game, to me, to beat Alabama.
And I love the way Tennessee started offensively last week against Florida, passing the ball. Quick hitters to score White. They were across the 50 in a hurry, and it just kind of went away.
I liked the first down passing. I don't have exact examples or statistics or anything like that. I actually wrote down in my notes last week. So again, I don't even know when in the game this came down, but I just wrote down first down passing with a check mark by it. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but at least at some moment in the game on Saturday, I thought to myself, I like the way they're passing it on first down. So maybe that's something to watch for here on Saturday as well.
Yeah, I don't think this is the case, but maybe it is, and I don't know. But I don't think it's too complex for Nico at all. I don't think the play calling is going over his head or anything. But I would just keep it as simple as possible. Really, just rely on Nico's strengths. The rolling out is something he's great at, and quick hitters to score White. Get Chris Brazzell involved big time because he had his best game of the year last week. Looked amazing. Dante Thornton will obviously probably play more this week. And I think you lean on those two guys' ability to make plays and Squirrel White to play well around the line of scrimmage and run the ball. I don't see how. I mean, it feels kind of like a simple fix. I know protection, like we said, is the root of all things, but it feels like they have to improve Ryan off in the passing game, and it doesn't feel like it's some pipe dream. It feels like it's so easy for this passing offense to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw that. That was, to me, the difference in the Florida game and Arkansas game. The Florida game, there were plays there that were to be made. And Arkansas, it didn't really feel like that at times. Now, I'm sure there were guys that were open. There were plays they could have hit that they didn't hit, but not to the degree that it was in the Florida game where it felt like things were close. I do think what becomes hard about what you're saying, Jack, or the challenge of that, is it just feels like if this team has to have a 12-play touchdown drive, or we'll say 10-play touchdown drive, the offensive line is going to screw up and put them in to derail a drive at some point. Because we've seen that so many times. That happened on Tennessee's third drive of the game. I think they had 1st and 10 at the 34, and Nico gets sacked 3 straight times. We saw that happen twice in the Arkansas game where they had a good drive cooking. They get right to the edge of field goal range. Holding calls derailed the line or derailed the drive. Side note, I said this to Rick on our post-game pod. Jack, I'll say it to you now. I've never seen, and this is being very selective, I've never seen a team get called for more. Quarterback rolls out on a drop back. He scrambles out of the pocket. Tennessee gets called for holding. Nico cannot get out of the pocket without their Campbell or her. They hold everything.
Things break down.
Yeah. Now, some of that, maybe it's a little bit ticky-tack. Obviously, neither of those players are playing at a particularly high level right now. But, I mean, there was a couple plays in that game where Nico scrambled for 8 to 15 yards. Good plays. Keep the drive moving. Never mind. He held. You're in 2nd and 20 now. This offense, 2nd and 20 is close to a death sentence.
Yep. I mean,
how about all those penalties on Monday Night Football the other day? I mean, just
22 total?
Unwatchable, the penalties. Got to clean those up on all levels.
22 penalties, 204 yards total.
Disgusting.
Each team had 11. It was terrible.
Disgusting.
Awful. Yeah. Let's do the flip side of this real quick of the forecasting before we get out of here. Ryan, if Tennessee wins no matter what, let's just say no matter how it happens, Tennessee wins this game. Is everybody back on the train? Is everybody saying back to the playoff, natty contender? Like, is Tennessee all the way back if they win this game? Doesn't even matter how they win.
I think short of natty contender. I think everybody's back on the playoffs. I don't think you see as much griping. I don't think you really see any griping about how they win if they win. So I think everybody will be really happy. Everybody will be back in the playoff. I'm sure there will be some fans that'll be back to the natty. But unless the offense scores 38 points in this game and the passing game looks pretty good, I don't think most people will be thinking natty.
Rick?
Yeah, it's funny. We were in a group text, the three of us, with other folks that we work with here, and one of the things that was talked about was, is Kentucky a potentially losable game? Is Vanderbilt a potentially losable game? I think there are a lot of fans that are sort of wondering that as they look forward to the rest of the season here. I think a win over Alabama at the very least, it gives people a lot of confidence for those two games that, hey, Tennessee can go and be competitive against Georgia no matter what happens. They're still going to be in a place where maybe they can sneak into the back end of the playoffs with a 10-2 record. So I think a win over Alabama gives Tennessee fans confidence that, Kentucky and Vanderbilt are certainly not going to be problems, or at least shouldn't be as big of a problems as they might have thought it was last week. And I think of a loss to Alabama puts in a pretty good bit of panic to people, even though that's sort of still the line of thinking that I thought before the season. Now, as I admitted, though, my line of thinking completely changed after the Oklahoma game, and I really thought that Tennessee was a definitive contender in that coming out of that Oklahoma game. So I think that you'll get a pretty decent little range of reactions, but that's my idea for at least a win. I think it'll give people a little bit more confidence for those other games. That's not Georgia. Give people a little bit more optimism that, hey, Tennessee can at least knock on the door to the playoffs and see what happens after that.
Hey, Tennessee is good at home. We know that. So if Tennessee is able to beat Alabama, when you look at the rest of the schedule, outside of Georgia, it's only Vandy that I think people will have even their slightest doubt on. Maybe Kentucky, but Kentucky just lost to Vandy at home, and that game's in Neyland. I just have a really hard time seeing Tennessee losing that game. Same with Miss State. So it'll be Georgia, loss. That gives you 2. And then Vandy, it's like just take care of business in Nashville to end the year. And Tennessee's in the playoff because the way college football, the chaos is reigning elsewhere. 10-2 will probably get the job done when all is said and done. So it's a big game for Tennessee, the biggest one of the season so far, obviously. Ryan, let's do a temperature check on the game for you real quick. Don't have to give a score, obviously, but which way are you leaning right now? The spread is 3 in favor of Alabama, which I was a little surprised by the way.
What did you think it would be?
I thought Tennessee would be favored.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be curious. Yeah, if
Tennessee,
let's say Tennessee had hit a couple of those plays, the scenario I laid out earlier, Tennessee hits a couple plays offensively that they almost did. They win 27-17 in regulation. I wonder how much that would have changed the line. Probably not a ton, but maybe closer to pick them. I think Alabama wins. That's where I'm leaning as of right now. Anybody that's listening to the podcast could probably decipher that just from the way I've talked about the game. I just have more trust in Alabama's defense than I do in Tennessee's offense. Those are the two bad units in these games. I think everybody knows Alabama's offense is good. Tennessee's defense is good. I have more trust in Alabama's defense than Tennessee's offense. And so with that aspect, I lean towards Alabama. I just see more pass to Alabama winning this game than I do Tennessee.
Rick, where are you at?
I'll tell you what, I refuse to take any sort of crap from Ryan for my upcoming answer. It's Wednesday morning. I don't know. I legitimately don't know. I've been thinking about this all morning. I've been thinking about this all week. I'm 50-50. If you give me a couple of minutes thinking about Tennessee, I'll give myself a couple of reasons why I think that Tennessee can sneak out a victory. However, if you give me a couple minutes to think about Alabama, I more confirm my own thinking that Alabama's going to win. If that makes sense. Like I kind of have to convince myself of the reasons why I think that Tennessee can pull it off at home. And I sort of have to confirm myself the reasons why I think that Alabama can win as the slightly better of the underperforming teams in this matchup. So I'm at a deadlock 50-50, honestly, right now. If you made me pick one, I would go Alabama, but I think I might pick Tennessee on Friday. I'm not sure. And again, that's not me trying to evade an answer. It's just saying that these are similar teams right now. And these are no, don't give me that smirk. I saw the smirk at the bottom of my screen. I told you I didn't want that. So I don't know. I don't right now. I don't have a temperature check. Now watch it. Watch it with a smirk.
Who has the coaching edge here? Legitimate question.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know enough about
Josh Heupel and Tim Banks.
Kalen DeBoer.
I think Josh Heupel and Tim Banks.
I think it's Heupel. I think
you have to add in Tim Banks to make it for me.
Yeah, fine.
I'll take Banks and Heupel over Womack and DeBoer right now.
Like, I'm a DeBoer guy. What he's done is so impressive. I still think he has a bright future at Bama, but you just don't do what you've done the last 2 games. Like, that just doesn't happen after a supremely dominant showing. It's very jarring. I'll take Heupel on the coaching edge, and it might be the reason I picked Tennessee. I don't know yet. I think Alabama has more paths to victory and probably better players, but I don't know. I'm very torn. It's a huge game for Kalen DeBoer. It's a much bigger game for DeBoer than it is for Heupel. That is for a fact, because it's like, how are you going to somehow turn this around? If you have another bad performance and drop 2 out of 3 after beating Georgia, that is a major wolf.
Paul Feinbaum had a pretty good, a very radio type of statement earlier this week. And as a radio guy myself, I loved every second of it. But he said, a couple weeks ago, Wall Street stopped trading on Kalen DeBoer's stock. Like, it was so high, they had to stop trading on all of it. Right now, he was like, it's on the penny stocks market. And I was like, wow, what a creative
sounds like
metaphor there. I thought that was really good. Penny stocks market.
All right, there you have it. Tennessee Alabama preview. It was the RTI gang going to Central and Powell Friday night. Is this happening, Rick?
No, it's probably not. I did get a nice shout out from Powell High School.
There you go.
I would like to mention one thing, and I wasn't planning on mentioning this until Ryan smirked at my answer a couple minutes ago. I would like to congratulate Jack Foster as part of the winning team with him and myself. The 3 of us, when we played a round of golf last week before the Florida game, we had a great time. A local course here in Knoxville. We had a phenomenal time, and Jack and I's team beat Ryan's team. It was a really great performance. Jack and I had to overcome a lot of adversity in that game, but not only did we win, we won by a pretty decent little amount. So
that's not true at all.
I would just like to congratulate Jack Foster on his win, and me on my win. But both of us.
I was about to be all complimentary because y'all played better. Jack, I thought, played very well. Rick, you came in clutch with some big shots on the back nine that proved crucial, and then you just started lying. Adversity, and we won handedly. You almost
I said semi-handedly
is what y'all did. No, you said handedly.
Maybe.
Hey,
they won 2-1. They won 2-1.
We kind of dominated you guys. I mean,
well, we were up like 3-0.
Y'all dominated. Y'all were up a ton, and then again, you talk adversity. Y'all almost choked like a dog. And then Jack, I will say, we were playing scramble. Jack drilled a massive, probably 12, 15-footer on 16 that would have tied it if he missed it. And then Rick threw one on par 3, 17th. He threw one to about 10 feet, and they made the solo birdie. So shout out Rick to put us away.
Yeah, solo bird to clinch it.
We had a great time. I only say that because I needed to get one back on Ryan.
I didn't even say anything.
I know you so well now.
I wasn't going to say anything, but
I
couldn't resist the smirk, and I don't even disagree with you. I think everything you said was fair. But when you did that, I'm not even trying to dodge it. I just had
because I was trying to dodge it. You saw right through my act. But we had a great time playing golf there. Well, us 3 will challenge anybody else from the Tennessee media on the. Yes, we will.
Sure.
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Those guys can't hang.
Yes, we will,
dude. And the listeners need to understand what made our win so improbable was that Ryan played dang near every day. And it's
Oh,
like,
that's not true.
I'm a has-been hack who plays just whenever Ryan invites me. Last time I played was last time I played with you, Shumpert.
Jack's not talking about his biggest adversity, but he did a great job overcoming it.
Rick is a beginner, and Ryan had.
It wasn't about being a high school hack. You had other obstacles you climbed in that game.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I maybe wasn't 100%. I maybe was questionable literally 30 minutes before tea time. But
Ryan's drink right there can give you a pretty good hint of his red Solo cup.
Let's just say I'm off on Thursday night. We played on a Friday. All right, that's all. Yeah. That's all anyone needs to know. Yeah, fun times. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, we will.
I love competing against Ryan. It's a lot of fun. That is going to wrap up this edition of the Rock Top Insider Press Pass podcast. For Ryan Shumpert, you can follow him at rshump00. That's SCHUMP. You can also give Rick Butler a follow at Rick Butler. And of course, follow Rock Top Insider at Rock Top Insider on all socials. Also, like, comment on this video, and subscribe to our Rock Top Insider YouTube channel if you're watching. If you're listening, wherever you find your podcast, we appreciate you giving us a listen as well. But for Rick and Ryan, we'll see you next week.